I was inspired to present this dish after a recent episode of MasterChef Australia in which Chef Sat Bains challenged contestants with this signature dish of his. While his version is what I would expect to be served in his 2 Michelin star restaurant, most of the recipe is unnecessarily complicated and expensive for a home kitchen. Here's a much simpler version that won't overwhelm you with technique, uses relatively inexpensive ingredients, and introduces a seldom seen ingredient that I'll be making more use of in the near future: dried powdered tomatoes.
Well, one of the key ingredients here in this, in fact maybe the key ingredient, is these dried tomatoes. We're not talking sun-dried, we're talking dried to where they can be ground up into a powder. Next, a full teaspoon of dried basil. I rarely use dried basil, but this is one of those instances why. You'll have to read the second volume of my cookbook to understand the rationale behind that. Here's the black peppercorns and the salt, and we're going to grind this up. This is the meat that I'm using. It's important that there's not pieces of silver skin in here that won't break up. So sometimes you get this tough membrane here. This won't break up well. So I'm going to go through and trim this off. Only takes a couple of minutes. Just peel it off as close as you can to the meat without losing any of the meat, of course. As little of the meat as possible. And I've sectioned the beef up into pretty large pieces because you want it to look nice on the plate. Depending on what size portion you're going to give to people, you could make this like an appetizer and give them just one piece, or you could make it into a meal for somebody who's really hungry and make this into 3 pieces per plate. But you want to keep the pieces fairly large. Here's the spices that we ground up here. Coat the meat evenly first with this. Next, I use a tablespoon of 15 milliliters of balsamic vinegar, or if it's not even, because we're going to massage this in. And then the same amount of extra virgin olive oil. Work this into the meat. And then when that's done, you're just going to cover this up with some cling film and refrigerate it. This is smelling real good right now. Believe me, you can already tell this is going to be awesome. The dried porcini mushrooms are not cooked, so they're going to go in the oven like this on a pan and roast. And after the dried mushrooms have been cooked, load them into the spice grinder and hand them up.
You want some good color on these pieces, but you don't need them to be black. Definitely do not burn them. Be careful that you don't burn the spices that are on the meat.
Let's brown on both sides. Juices left in the bottom of this bowl. We're going to add the water to this so that we get all of those. You can see there's a lot of fond in this pan there. Put the shallots, the mushroom stems in, just the stems. breaking up some of this flan. I can use a little of the water. Don't use all of it. Don't put it all in. A little bit of the water to help deglaze the pan. Get up all the stuff off the bottom. And cook this for just a couple minutes. Most of the cooking for this is going to happen in the pressure cooker. And transfer all this to the pressure cooker, along with the rest of the water there. And, of course, the meat. And then, finally, the deglaze it'll melt down when it's cooking. Don't worry about that. This is a very good thick deglaze I made myself. You can also use the some of that Knorr beef gel stock, as I explained in the text at the beginning. And then we put the lid on it, clamp it down. It's important to make sure you count the time once the steam actually begins to come out. Just a little bit of steam. We want to keep it below the point where it's just rupturing steam. Just keep it right at that threshold and cook it for about 45-50 minutes. This is when we lower the heat and begin counting the time.
This is what you want to see, just little wisps of steam coming out.
And eventually your time runs up. Release the pressure. Usually I let it run longer, but in this case the timing is actually important because you don't want that beef to be too broken up. Now, rescue that beef out of here. It's tender.
Yeah, just keep it on a platter off to the side, or refrigerate it if you're going to be cooking it later. Mash it down through the sieve as best you can, but don't worry about getting every last